Good day, everyone, and welcome to topic 5 Risk Planning in a Project Management. In this topic, we will discuss an important area in a project management, which is how project managers deal with uncertainty and prepare for potential risks before they become serious problems. In reality, there is no project is completely free from risk, whether it involves delays, budget issues, technical problems, or external disruptions. Risk can affect project performance at any stage. Because of that, effective project managers do not wait for problems to happen first. They plan ahead, identify possible risks, assess their impact, and prepare suitable response strategies. In today's lessons, we will try to explore the process of risk planning, including how risks are identified, analyzed, prioritized, and monitored throughout the project life cycle. We will also look at practical tools such as risk register, response planning, and simple risk analysis technique that can support better project decisions. Most importantly, I want you to understand that risk planning is not about predicting every possible problem. It is about being prepared when uncertainty appears and ensuring the project can continue moving towards its objective. So let us begin with topic 5, risk planning in a project management. Before we go further into risk planning, we first need to understand why risk exists in a project. One important reason is project uncertainty. In project management, uncertainty is something normal. Projects operate in changing environments. Information may be incomplete, resources may be limited, and sometimes unexpected situations happen without warning. Because of this condition, project can face risks that may affect scope, schedule, cost, and quality. For example, a project may begin with a clear schedule, but suddenly material prices increase, a supplier is delayed, or stakeholder requirements change. These are uncertainty that can create risk for the project. This is where risk management becomes important. Risk management is not simply reacting when problem occurs. It is a systematic process where project managers identify possible risks early, assess their seriousness, prioritize which risks need attention, and plan suitable response in advance. In other words, instead of waiting for a problem to happen and then rushing to solve them, project managers try to think ahead. They prepare early to reduce threats, minimize disruptions, and improve the chances of project success. That is why understanding uncertainty and risk management is the foundations before we move into the risk planning process. By the end of this topic, students should be able to define project risk and risk planning, able to explain the risk management process, identify different types of project risk, analyze risk using simple tools, develop a risk response plan, and prepare a basic risk register. Now let's look at the very basic important question. What is risk? In project management, risk refers to an uncertain event or conditions that may affect project objective if it occurs. The keyword here is uncertain. It means the event has not happened yet, but there is a possibility that it could happen. If it's happened, it may influence the performance of the project. Normally, we look at how risk may affect four main areas. First is time. A risk may cause schedule delays and affect project completions. Second is cost. Risk can lead to budget overrun and increase project expenses. Third is scope, where risk may affect the ability of the project to deliver all intended requirements. And fourth is quality, where risk may result in poor or substandard deliverables. So, when we discuss risk, we are really discussing anything that may threaten these important project objectives. Now, look at the simple formula below. Risk equals probability multiplied by impact. This helps us understand how risk is often assessed. Probability refers to the likelihood that a risk may occur. Impact refers to the seriousness of its effect if it happens. For example, if a risk has a high chance of happening and a high impact on the project, then that risk needs serious attention. But if the likelihood is low and the impact is small, it may require less attention. This is why project managers do not only ask, what can go wrong? They also ask, how likely is it to happen? And how serious will the effect be? That is the basis of risk analysis, which we build on in the next slide. Now, let us make an important distinction between risk and issue, because these two terms are often confused. In project management, they are not the same. A risk refers to something that may happen in the future. It is still uncertain. There is a possibility it could occur, but it has not happened yet. Because of that, risks require preventive action. We try to identify them early and plan how to manage them before they affect the project. An issue is different. An issue is something that has already happened. It is no longer uncertain. It is now a real problem that needs attention. Because of that, issues require corrective action to solve or minimize the impact. Look at the example here. If we say supplier may deliver late, there is a risk because the delay has not happened yet, but there is a possibility it could happen. As project managers, we might prepare a response early, such as identifying a backup supplier. But if we say supplier is already late, that is now an issue. The problem is happening and the focus changes from prevention to correction. We may need to revise the schedule, follow up urgently with the supplier, or activate a contingency plan. So a simple way to remember this is risk is something you prepare for, while an issue is something you deal with. Understanding this difference is very important because managing risk and managing issues involve a different action. Now we move to the question, what is risk planning? Risk planning is the process of preparing how risk will be managed throughout a project. It is not only about identifying risks, but also deciding what to do about those risks before they become a major problem. The first step is identifying risks. This means recognizing possible events or conditions that may affect project objectives, such as cost, time, scope, or quality. At this stage, the project team tries to think ahead and ask what could potentially go wrong. The second step is assessing risks. After risks are identified, we assess how likely each risk is to occur and what impact it may have on the project. This helps us understand which risks are more serious than others. The third step is prioritizing risks. Not every risk requires the same level of attention. Some risks are critical and need immediate actions, while others may simply be monitored. Prioritizing helps the project team focus resources on the most important risks. The fourth step is developing responses. Here, the project team plans appropriate actions to manage the risk. This may involve avoiding a risk, reducing its impact, transferring it, or accepting it with a contingency plan in place. And the final step is monitoring risk continuously. Risk planning does not stop after the plan is prepared. Risks need to be tracked throughout the project because conditions may change, new risks may emerge, and response actions may need adjustment. So overall, risk planning is a proactive process. It helps project managers prepare early, respond systematically, and improve the chances of project success. Now, this slide gives a very practical picture of why risk planning matters. It shows the difference between a project without risk planning and a project with proper risk planning. Let us look at the left side first, which represents a project without risk planning. In these situations, projects are more exposed to financial and schedule instability. Delays happen, costs increase unexpectedly, and the project starts losing control. We also see resource and operational disruptions. When risks are not identified early, even a small disruptions can affect progress and create a bigger problems. Team may struggle to respond because there was no preparation in place. And because of poor preparations, the probability of failure becomes much higher. In many cases, projects do not fail because risk exists, but because risks were not managed properly. Now, compare that with the right side, a project with the risk planning. Here, we see a very different picture. First, risk planning can improve the chances of project success because potential threats are identified early and response actions are prepared. Second, it reduces uncertainty. Of course, uncertainty can never be removed completely, but good planning makes the project environment more predictable and manageable. Third, it supports better decision making. When risks are analyzed in advance, project managers can make better decisions under pressure instead of reacting blindly when problems arise. So the message of this slide is simple. Risk planning can be the difference between chaos and success. It does not guarantee that no problem will occur, but it increases preparedness, reduces disruptions, and improves project control. And that is exactly why risk planning is an important part of project management. Now, this slide introduces two major sources of project risk, which are internal risk and external risk. This distinction is important because the source of the risk often influences how we manage it. Let us begin with the internal risks. Internal risks are risks that come from within the project or organization itself. In many cases, these are risks that the project team has a greater control over. For example, resource shortages or team conflict can affect project performance if there are not enough people, equipment, or if the communication within the team is weak. These issues can slow down progress and create disruptions. Another example is poor planning. If the project scope is unclear, tasks are not properly allocated, or schedules are unrealistic, the project may face risks even before execution begins. We also have technical errors. Problems related to system, tools, or technology can create risks, especially in a project that depend heavily on technical performance. Now let us look at external risks. External risks come from outside the project and are often harder to control directly. For example, market and regulatory changes may affect the project requirements, budget, or timelines. A change in policy or economic conditions can create risks even when the project itself is well managed. Supplier failure is another common external risk. If a third-party vendor fails to deliver material or services on time, the project may be affected even though the problem originates outside the project team. And of course, natural disasters such as floods, storms, or other environmental disruptions can also create a major project risk. So, the key point here is this. Internal risks are often more controllable, while external risks may require stronger monitoring, contingency planning, and adaptability. As a project managers, we need to consider both when identifying risks. Now we move to common risk categories. In practice, project risk can come from many sources, so categorizing risks helps project managers identify them more systematically. It also makes analysis and response planning easier. The first is strategic risks. These are risks related to decisions, project directions, or alignment with organizational goals. For example, if a project is based on poor strategic decisions or if a priority suddenly change, the project may face serious challenges even if day-to-day activities are running well. The second is operational risks. These risks are related to internal processes, people, resources, and daily operations. For example, breakdown in communication, resource shortages, or weak coordinations can affect how the project is executed. The third is financial risk. This relates to money and budget-related uncertainties. Examples include budget overruns, insufficient funding, rising costs, or unexpected financial losses that may affect project progress. Financial risks are common in many projects, especially where cost estimates are uncertain. The fourth is technical risks. These are risks related to technology, system, design problem, or technical requirement. For instance, system incompatibility, software failure, or flaws in design can create significant project disruption. So what we can see here is that risks do not only come from external events. They can also come from decisions, operations, finances, and technical factors within the project itself. That is why risk categories are useful. They help project managers to think more broadly and identify risks that might otherwise be missed. Let us continue with three more important risk categories. The fifth is schedule risk. This refers to risks that may cause delays in the project timeline. These delays may happen because of unrealistic schedules, resource shortages, task dependencies, or unexpected disruptions. For example, if one critical task is delayed, it may affect other dependent activities and cause the entire project schedule to slip. The sixth is legal risk. There are risks related to contract, regulations, compliance requirements, or legal dispute. For example, if project fails to comply with regulatory requirement, it may face penalties, delay, or even project suspension. This is why legal considerations can also be a major source of project risk. The seventh is environmental risks. These risks come from environmental conditions or external environmental factors that may affect project executions. Examples include natural disaster, extreme weather, sustainability concern, or environmental regulations. In some projects, especially constructions or infrastructure projects, environmental risks can have significant impact. So if we look at these categories together, schedule, legal, environmental risks, we can see that project risks can emerge from many different areas. This is why using risk categories help project managers identify risks more comprehensively rather than looking at risks too narrow. Now we move to the overall project risk management process. This slide shows the 5 main steps involved in managing project risk, and this step should be seen as a continuous process, not separate activities. The first step is plan risk management. At this stage, the project team decides how risk will be managed. This includes the method to be used, who is responsible, and the procedure for handling risk throughout the project. In simple terms, this step sets the foundation for risk management. The second step is identify risks. Here, the team recognizes and documents possible risks that may affect project objectives. This can include both threats and opportunity. The goal is to identify risks early before they become serious problems. The third step is analyze risks. Once risks are identified, the next question is, how serious are they? At this stage, risks are assessed based on likelihood and impact. So, the team can determine which risks require more attention. This is where prioritization begins. The fourth step is plan responses. After understanding the risks, the project team develop actions to manage them. These may involve avoiding risks, reducing them, transferring them, or accepting them, depending on the nature of the risk. And the fifth step is monitor risk. Risk management does not stop after responses are planned. Risks need to be tracked continuously, changes need to be reviewed, and response actions need to be checked to ensure they remain effective. So if you look at this process as a whole, it follows a logical flow. First, we plan how to manage risks, then identify risks, analyze them, respond to them, and finally monitor them throughout the project. That is the core process of project risk management. Now we move into step 1, plan risk management, which is the foundations of the entire risk management process. Before identifying or analyzing risks, the project team must first decide how risk will be managed. The first element is defining the risk approach. This means deciding the overall method the project will use to identify, assess, respond to, and monitor risks. In simple terms, this is the strategy for managing risk throughout the project. The second element is assigning roles and responsibility. Risk management should not be treated as one person's job alone. Responsibility need to be clearly assigned. Who will identify risks? Who will manage responses? Who will monitor risk status? Clear rules improve accountability. The third element is establishing risk categories. Grouping risks into categories such as financial, operational, or technical risks help the team identify risks more systematically and reduce the chance of overlooking important risks. The fourth element is determining risk tolerance. This means defining how much risk the organization or project is willing to accept before action is required. Some risks may be acceptable, while others may need immediate response depending on their severity. And the fifth element is standardizing reporting formats. These involve deciding how risk information will be documented and communicated, for example, through a risk register, status report, or regular risk review meetings. So, overall, step first is about creating the structure for managing risk. It sets the rules, responsibility, and approach that guide all the next step in the risk management process. Now class, we move to step 2, risk identification, which focuses on recognizing potential risks that may affect the project. This step is important because risks cannot be managed if they are not identified first. The first method shown here is brainstorming. This involves group discussions among project team members to generate possible risks based on their knowledge and experience. The advantage of brainstorming is that it allows different perspectives, and sometimes one person may identify risks that others did not notice. The second method is expert insight or expert judgment. Here, the project team seeks input from specialists, senior manager, or people with relevant experience. Their knowledge can help identify risks that may not be obvious to the project team. The third method is checklists. These are predefined lists of common project risks used as a guide to make sure important risks are not overlooked. Checklists are useful because they provide structure during the identification process. And the fourth method is SWOT analysis. This involves analyzing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In risk identifications, weaknesses and threats are particularly useful for identifying potential risks that may affect the project. And the fifth method is lesson learned or reviewing past projects. This means looking at previous project experiences, recurring problems, or historical risks so the same mistake cannot be repeated. So what we can see is that risk identification does not rely on one method only. Project managers often use several methods together to ensure risks are identified as comprehensively as possible. The stronger the risk identification process, the stronger the foundation for the next stage, which is risk analysis. Now we move to step 3, qualitative risk analysis. After risk has been identified, the next question is which risk should receive the most attention? That is the purpose of qualitative risk analysis. It helps the project team assess risks and prioritize them. This analysis is commonly based on two factors: probability and impact. First is probability or likelihood. This refers to the chance that a risk may occur. Some risks may have a likelihood of happening, while others may be less likely. At this stage, project managers use available information and judgment to estimate the likelihood. Second is impact or severity. This refers to how serious the consequences may be if the risk occurs. For example, a risk may affect project cost, schedule, scope, or quality. The greater the impact, the more serious the risk. Now, when we combine probability and impact, we can prioritize risk using a simple risk scale. High priority risks are risks with a significant likelihood and serious impact. These risks usually require immediate attention and strong response planning. Medium priority risks may not be as critical, but they still need monitoring and appropriate response actions prepared. And low priority risks generally have low likelihood or limited impact, so they may require lighter monitoring or simple contingency planning. So the purpose of this step is not just to assess risk, but to help the team focus attention where it matters most. Because in practice, project teams cannot treat every risk as equally important. Qualitative risk analysis help decide which risks need urgent action, which need monitoring, and which may require less attention. This slide shows how the probability impact metric help us prioritize risks more clearly. This is one of the simplest and most practical tools used in risk analysis. The idea is straightforward. We assess each risk based on two things: its probability, meaning how likely it is to occur, and its impact, meaning how serious the impact or the effect will be if it's happened. When a risk has high probability and high impact, it becomes a critical risk. These are the risks that need the most attention because they have both a strong chance of occurring and serious consequences for the project. That is why the slide highlights an important point: focus attention on priority risks. In practice, project teams do not have unlimited time and resources, so attention should be given first to the risks that pose the greatest threats. Now, let us look at the example. The first example is supplier delay. It has high probability and high impact, so it is classified as critical. This is a priority risk and will normally require immediate response planning. The second example is staff absence. It has medium probability and medium impact, so it is considered a moderate risk. This still requires monitoring and response preparations, but it may not be as urgent as critical risk. The third example is a minor software bug. It has low probability and low impact, so it is considered a low priority risk. It may only require simple monitoring or basic contingency planning. So the purpose of the risk matrix is to help project manager decide where to focus first. It supports prioritizations, better resource allocations, and more effective response planning. Now we move to step 4, planning risk responses, where the question changes from identifying and analyzing risk to deciding what action should be taken. In general, there are four common ways to handle project threats. The first is avoid. Avoid means removing the risk entirely by changing the plan so the threat no longer exists. For example, if a supplier is considered unreliable, the project may avoid that risk by switching to a more reliable supplier. The idea here is to eliminate the source of the risk. The second is mitigate. Mitigate means reducing either the likelihood of the risk happening or reducing its impact if it does happen. For example, adding buffer stock or extra time in the schedule can reduce the effect of possible disruptions. In many projects, mitigation is one of the most common strategies used. The third is transfer. Transfer means shifting responsibility or financial impact to another party. This can be done through insurance, contracts, or outsourcing. For example, a project may outsource a specialized activity to reduce the risk carried by the project team. And the fourth is accept. Accept means acknowledging that the risk exists and being prepared to deal with it if it occurs. This is often supported by a contingency plan. In other words, the risk is not removed, but the team is prepared with a response. So these four responses give project managers different options depending on the nature of the risk. Some risks may need to be avoided, some reduced, some transferred, and some simply accepted with preparation in place. The important point that risks should not be identified and then ignored. They must be matched with suitable response actions. Now we move to risk monitoring, which is the stage where risk management continues throughout the project. This is important because risks do not remain static. They can change, new risks can emerge, and response action may need adjustment. The first thing we monitor is risk trigger. These are warning signs or indicators that suggest a risk may be about to occur. By watching for this signal, the project team can take early action before the risk develops into a bigger problem. The second is risk status. This means reviewing the current conditions of identified risks. Some risks may still be active, some may become more serious, so may reduce in severity, some of them, and some may already be resolved. So monitoring risk status helps the team stay updated. The third is new risks. During project execution, new risks may appear due to changes in the project environment, stakeholder environment, or external conditions. So that is why monitoring is not only about tracking old risks, but also identifying new ones. The fourth is response effectiveness. This means evaluating whether the planned risk response are actually working. If a response is not producing the intended result, adjustments may be needed. So the key message here is that risk monitoring is not simply watching risks. It is about tracking warning signs, reviewing risk conditions, identifying new risks, and making sure response actions remains effective. This is what keeps risk management active throughout the project life cycle. Now, this slide explains an important distinction between a contingency plan and a fallback plan. These two are related, but they are not the same. Contingency plan, or what this slide calls Plan B, is the first response prepared in advance if an identified risk occurs. In other words, this is the action we intend to use first when the risk happens. It is a pre-planned response, not something created at the last minute. For example, in the supplier failure scenario shown here, if the main supplier cannot deliver materials, the contingency plan is to use a secondary supplier. That is the first response to manage the risk. Now, a fallback plan or plan C is different. A fallback plan is a backup response used only if the contingency plan does not work. It is the second layer of protection. Using the same example, if the secondary supplier is also unable to deliver, then the fallback plan may be to source material locally or revise the project schedule. That's become the backup response when the first response fails. So a simple way to understand this is the contingency plan is the first response, while the fallback plan is the backup response. This distinction is important because some risks, especially critical risks, may require more than one level of response. Good risk planning does not stop at having only one option. Sometimes it's also prepare for what happens if the first option does not work. Now, let us look at the real project example to see how risks appear in practice. This example focuses on construction project where uncertainty can affect cost, schedule, and project performance in many ways. The first risk shown here is surging material prices. In construction projects, fluctuations in the price of steel, cement, or other materials can increase project costs unexpectedly. This creates financial risk and may affect the project budget if not planned for. The second is contractor performance delays. Delays may happen due to poor scheduling, labor shortages, coordination problems, or contractor-related setbacks. If contractor performance is weak, it can affect the project timeline and disrupt progress. The third risk is permit approval bottlenecks. In many projects, approval from authorities are required before certain work can proceed. If approval are delayed, the project may face schedule disruptions even when the project team is ready to move forward. And the fourth risk is unpredictable weather disruptions. Environmental conditions such as heavy rain, storms, or flooding may interrupt construction activities and create delays beyond the control of the project. Now, what is important here is not only recognizing these risks, but also seeing how different types of risks can affect the same project. Some affect costs, some affect schedule, some can come from external parties, and some come from environmental factors. This is why risk planning matters. By identifying these risks early, the project team can prepare suitable responses such as contingency budget, backup schedules, alternative suppliers, or weather-related mitigation measures. That is how risk planning supports better project control in real project situations. Before we conclude, it is also important to understand that risk planning can fail when common mistakes are made. Sometimes projects do not struggle because the tools are weak, but because the risk process is not applied properly. The first mistake is ignoring minor risks. Small risks may seem unimportant at first, but if they are overlooked, they can grow into much bigger problems. Minor risks should not simply be dismissed. The second mistake is not assigning a risk owner. If nobody is clearly responsible for managing a risk, accountability becomes weak and response actions may be delayed. Every significant risk should have someone responsible for monitoring and managing it. The third mistake is treating risk assessment as a one-time activity. Risk planning is not something done only at the beginning of a project and then forgotten. Risks change, new risks may emerge, and existing risks may increase or decrease over time. That is why risk assessment must be continuous. The fourth mistake is having no contingency plan. If a risk occurs and there is no prepared response, the project may struggle to react effectively. Contingency planning is part of being prepared. And the fifth mistake is poor monitoring. Even when risks are identified and responses are planned, weak monitoring can cause warning signs to be missed and risks to develop into issue. So the message here is simple. Good risk planning is not only about using the right tools, but also avoiding this common mistake. Because even a well-designed risk plan can fail if it is poorly managed in practice. Before we close, let us summarize the key takeaways from this topic. First, risk cannot be eliminated. In project management, uncertainty will always exist. No matter how well a project is planned, there will always be a potential risk. Second, risk can be managed. While risk cannot be removed completely, they can be identified, analyzed, controlled through proper planning and response strategies. Third, good risk planning reduces uncertainty. It helps project teams prepare for possible disruptions, improve decision making, and reduce surprises during project executions. Fourth, risk management is continuous. It is not a one-time activity done only at the beginnings of the project. Risks need to be monitored and managed throughout the project lifecycle. And then finally, strong projects prepare before problems happen. Successful projects do not rely only on reacting when problems arise. They focus on preparations, anticipations, and proactive planning. So overall, the key message from this topic is that effective risk planning is not about avoiding uncertainty completely, but about managing uncertainty in a structured and proactive way to support project success. Before we end this topic, let us conclude with one final reflection. Throughout this chapter, we have seen that risk planning is not about trying to predict every possible problem that may happen in a project. In reality, that is not possible. Uncertainty will always exist. What matters is how prepared the project team is to respond when uncertainty arises. We have discussed how effective risk management helps project managers identify risks early, assess their significance, plan suitable responses, and monitor risk continuously throughout the project life cycle. These actions help reduce disruption, support better decisions, and improve the likelihood of project success. The important point to remember is that project management is not about eliminating risk completely, because risk is a natural part of every project. Instead, it is about managing risk proactively, systematically, and continuously. And that brings us back to the key message of this topic. The goal is not to predict every problem, but to prepare when uncertainty appears. I hope this topic has given you a clearer understanding of how risk planning supports stronger project management practice. Thank you. And if you have any question or would like to discuss any part of this topic further, we can continue in our discussion.